you just joined us, this is an internal auditor's 60-minute session, How to Manage Conflicts of Interest in Your Organization, presented by Tessa Court. For those who have not met Tessa before, Tessa is the CEO, founder and director of Intelligence Bank, a SaaS performance that helps teams better manage business processes online. Intelligence Bank's key products include Intelligence Bank Risk and Compliance, Intelligence Bank's Digital Asset Management, and Intelligence Bank Boards. Intelligence Bank has been named as a Deloitte Asia Fast 500 winner, and Tessa was a finalist in the NAB Women's Agenda Entrepreneur of the Year Awards. Prior to Intelligence Bank, Tessa was the global CMO of Hitwise, an audience measurement firm, and has held various senior roles in global advertising. Hi Tessa, I'm about to open up your mic. Welcome to the session.
Great, thank you so much. Yep, okay, so thank you so much for the introduction and welcome to everyone for the webinar. What I thought we would do is I'll just go through the presentation and first, and then if you have any specific questions, you can just send me a private message to the presenter through the chat, or you can send it to everyone, but that way I'll be sure to see it. And then we can take questions at the end, so that way if people don't want to hear all the questions, they can just jump off as well. So, so as Michael mentioned, Intelligence Bank is a software company, and what we do is we help companies, especially risk and internal auditors, manage risk business problems with software. And so we see it all, including when good people do bad things. So, and I guess today's discussion is really how to manage conflicts of interest in your organization. And we'll talk about two ways some of our clients use software to kind of help do that instead of, try to get away from spreadsheets as well. So just, I guess, some of the topics that we'll be discussing. Firstly, we're going to define what a conflict of interest is. We'll talk about the different types of conflicts that exist and the differences between what a conflict is and what fraud actually is. We'll talk a little bit also about the role of ethics within an organization and the importance of creating an ethical environment for business to thrive. And we'll also talk about the cost of not having ethics and systems and structures to avoid conflicts of interest. The two case studies that I'll be talking about today, one is with Suncorp. So they have a very robust conflict of interest program that they have been using for several years. And I'll just talk a little bit about, what their challenges were and, kind of how they solved that with technology, and also how do they really bring their conflict of interest policy to life. And then we'll also talk a little bit about control self-assessments, and our partner in that area is Deloitte. So I can show you an example of what they do there. So that's basically an overview of what we'll be covering. And I guess what you're going to be learning out of the webinar is, with regards to conflicts of interest, what are the ethics issues around it and the processes using technology. And then, as I mentioned, we'll talk a little bit more about Suncorp as well. So just a little bit of, I guess, my background. So I'm the CEO of Intelligence Bank, and we do provide governance, risk, and compliance technology to large corporates around Australia and globally. The four tools that we focus on is conflict of interest, control self-assessment, whistleblower, and also incident and risk registers as well. And just to give you some context, the types of clients that we do work with, and really these are the source of insights that we're talking about today. So, from our key clients, we are now experts at talking about why managing COI is important to the organization, why do conflicts actually occur, who does it impact, and what's the bigger picture for it, and then also how do you create, the culture of good ethics and good governance using software as well. So I guess the first point here is what is a conflict of interest? And that's kind of a big topic because it's actually not when somebody does something bad, but it's actually, or illegal I should say, but it's actually when an individual or a company or an entity has an obligation which has the potential to compromise objectivity. So for a conflict to be actual, it doesn't have to have happened yet. It can just be there as well. And usually what happens is somebody is using their position of authority to gain personal or professional or financial gain given the situation. And again, this can happen to both individuals as well as institutions. So that's actually a really important thing to keep in mind. Why is managing conflict of interest important? So I guess there are two issues. One is whether it's perceived or a real conflict basically impacts how the entire organization deals with ethical issues is the first thing. And then there's been stats proven that ethical companies have better bottom line, so it's actually better for everyone. So what are conflict of interest policy and a system to kind of manage that? And I guess when I say system, I'm not talking about, okay, this is our policy, we're going to put it on the intranet, and then of course no one reads it. And that's the biggest issue. So how do you really help bring these policies and these systems to life? And you need to do this to obviously prevent conflicts of happening, to prevent incidents of bias happening, and also for reputation. Because a lot of times something might not have actually happened, but because the conflict exists, the organization suffers from reputational damage as well down the line. So that's another important thing to think about. So I guess the difference between a conflict of interest and something that's improprietary is that there's kind of confusion over that. And somebody's accused of a conflict of interest may deny that a conflict exists because he or she didn't act improperly. And that's something that we see a lot within organizations where, you know, there's pushback on things where people will say, well, I wouldn't ever do anything wrong, so therefore it's okay if my brother is our accountant and I'm on the board of this company. So there are things like that that come up every day. And so one way to talk to your team or to word your policies is that a conflict of interest can actually exist if there are no improper acts as a result of it. So one way to think about this and talk about it is to talk about it in terms of a conflict of roles. So, you know, if you are making a decision on something, it is not appropriate for your brother to be the recipient of that, as an example. One of the things that 3M does, and this is from their policy in the U.S., is that they state very clearly that our reputation business can be damaged when personal interests influence or appear to influence business judgment. So they make it extremely clear that the conflict need not have happened. It's just the fact that it exists is a problem. So that's something as an important takeaway. Another case study which is kind of interesting is with the Canadian Broadcasting Authority, and basically the perception of conflict is evidence enough. So this was actually featured in The Conversation, which is an online newspaper from different journalists and academics from June 2015. And what happened here was that there was a kind of a senior broadcaster who was using his position as, I guess, a prominent member of the community to help his friend sell artwork, and he received about $300,000 in commission. So, you know, he thought that, you know, why, this is just a little side business that I'm doing. I'm not doing anything wrong. But it obviously posed a huge and reasonable decision by the CBC to terminate his position because it wasn't consistent with their editorial policy and ethics policy as a journalist. So these things happen all day, and, you know, usually make front page news. So it's more of a reputational issue mostly as well. So I guess when we think about conflicts and about avoiding conflicts, we think about who do these conflicts potentially impact. And the reality is that it has the potential to impact everyone. When you look at the propensity of people to do, to make decisions that are not in the best interest of the organization, as well as the potential for them to be illegal. So when faced with the opportunity, 10 to 20% of employees never commit fraud regardless of the situation or never do anything unethical. 60 to 80% would take part of a situation if the situation is right. And then there's another 10 to 20 who will always steal or be dishonest. So these are very consistent statistics that we see in Australia as well as overseas. So this is basically the 80-20 rule coming into play in human nature. So this is the reality of what businesses are dealing with every day. And the cost of these conflicts and poor ethics is huge. So in general, 48% of employees do something unethical or illegal each year. So unethical could be pulling a sick day. I mean, and that's unethical, and that's, you know, in a sense, stealing from your employer. Most people have no ramifications for that unless there are several in a row or several over the year. But that's a pretty high number of where ethics kind of fall down within organizations. And just a stat that I read about the U.S. economy is that it actually costs about $400 billion to the U.S. economy. So obviously the Australian economy is a bit smaller than that, but it would still have an effect in the billions to the Australian economy for staff behaving in an unethical fashion. So I just received a question about where do these statistics come from, and there was a survey from the Ethics Officer Association survey, and that's where this data is coming from. So I guess the other question is, why do good people do bad things, or why does this happen? So I guess the stats that, it is possible for most people to do something unethical if given the chance. The reason why this happens is that there are no internal controls, or there's a lack of internal controls, or there's no culture of conflict management. And at the end of the day, it starts from the top, and it's really the impetus of the organization and senior management and the board to ensure that there is a robust conflict of interest, not just a policy, but also a system and a practice for people to use it. I mean, some of the companies that we work with, what happens is, we're called in because, conflicts are running rife within the organization, especially in the form of entertainment is kind of a big thing from suppliers. So a lot of times what will happen is there'll be some clunky form off the internet that nobody uses, that senior management ignore, or don't think it applies to them, and then try to make everyone else to do it. So those are the kinds of things that we see quite often. So again, with regards to responsibility, managers need to play a key role in establishing an ethical tone in setting the standards, and also participating in control, so a no exceptions policy. So if you do have a system, whatever you're using, it applies to, the receptionist just as it applies to the chairman of the board as well. So I guess before we go into the case study, what I'd like to just talk a little bit about is the relationship between a conflict and fraud. So conflict can be actual or received or perceived, but if it's an actual, the conflict is in effect fraud if it does occur. So defining what fraud is and where conflicts sit in that. So with regards to fraud, very broadly defined, fraudulent, I guess the kind of the key areas for that is fraudulent financial reporting, which is a pretty obvious way to commit fraud, stealing, whether it's money, time, or misuse of resources, and even misuse of resources, meaning you work at a company performing a job and you're doing that as a side job and using the company's resources without advising your employer for doing that. There's corruption, so bribery, conflicts, and kickbacks, and then billing of products not delivered. So those are kind of the four key areas of fraud. And where conflict of interest lies under is in the corruption area as well. So the conflict provides the opportunity for corruption to happen. So another way to think about it is that a conflict is in essence a breeding ground for corruption. So what's important in your policies and your systems that you do is that a conflict of interest should be declared and discovered and voluntarily diffused before the corruption happens. So that's why COI is a very important part of your, of your policy internally. So if we think about how corruption happens, there's really kind of three things that enable it to occur. One is the opportunity. So if you do not have a COI policy in place, if you do not have internal controls in place, you have the opportunity to do so. But it's not just the opportunity that makes people commit any sort of conflict or fraud. They also need an incentive. So incentives usually are financial pressure, status, gambling or drug addiction, and sometimes often in high pressure fields such as banking where there's sales targets and things like that. Achieving your KPIs and your goals also provides the incentive to do that. And then the person also needs to have rationalization, so why they did that. So I don't get paid enough, or my boss does it, or everyone's doing it. So that's where that whole concept of having an really that strong ethical base within your organization is quite important, because that kind of try to kills some of those issues. But really, the only thing that your business can actually really affect is opportunity. So you do that with your policies, your systems, your controls, and then obviously the culture, your culture and your ethical culture within the organization. So in thinking about the types of conflict of interest, and hopefully that just gave everyone an overview of how conflict can lead to fraud and other things. But in thinking about types of conflict, there's basically 6 areas of where this happens. And one is, I guess, with directors. So from an ASIC perspective, directors must declare conflict of interest as part of their role on a company board. And that usually happens across board meetings, but directors are also in prime position to take advantage of relationships. So directors can be found guilty for doing that, and so that's why usually declaring conflicts is part of the board meeting process and managing that directly. Then there's financial conflict. So usually this has to do with stockbrokers with the idea of pumping and dumping share prices. So that happens, but there's also financial interest. So working with one of our clients, one of the things that we saw is one of the senior managers was advocating to purchase another company in which he had financial interest. So it can happen, not just boards of directors, but it can happen with line managers as well. Another favorite is nepotism. So we're opening an office in another country, and oh, my brother has a warehouse where he can put all the stuff. So that's another issue. And even if it's legitimate, it needs to go through, it's okay if somebody hires somebody's brother, for instance, but it needs to go through a vetted process with competitive quotes as well. We just got a question saying, I've noted you haven't mentioned entertainment under types of conflict, and that's usually gifts given and received. So that's where entertainment kind of falls under. So a gift given could be anything as innocuous as like a Christmas basket, or it could be travel to, a conference or things like that. So they just need to be recognized, and the company must have a policy. So some clients we work with, anything under $200, that it just needs to be reported. But it doesn't get elevated to the next level. Where we have some clients who they have a policy where there are no gifts whatsoever to be given or received within the organization. One of the questions that we just got about, I guess, enforcing suppliers for disclosing COI. So one of the things that Suncorp do very, very well, I guess, with their brokers is that they invite suppliers to participate in their COI process. So you can have, I guess, using the technology, and that's really where technology comes in as a way for suppliers to self-register and declare as well. And you would do that, I would assume, for clients, or for your suppliers rather, who are over a certain limit. For a smaller supplier, you wouldn't worry, but if they're a major supplier, you can actually have them engage into your technology platform as well. Another thing that comes up is fund for comment. So, for instance, this happens in the medical profession quite frequently, where you have pharmaceutical companies giving grants to researchers to write favorable reports about a certain drug or a new piece of technology. And then lastly, there's relational. So it's similar to nepotism, but it's more about, relationships with businesses and, just hiring your mates, for instance, is something that happens all the time without having the proper quotation capability as well. So the other thing I just wanted to share with you is what we call the legal and ethical grid, and kind of where conflicts sit in this. So I guess when you think about ethics and legality, they all have the same demands, but not always, and that's what this chart shows. So obviously laws apply to all people in society, at least in theory, but ethical rules apply to only those people in a society who identify with certain things. So if you think about this chart, under the green boxes, it's legal and ethical, so that's a pretty clear-cut thing. unethical and illegal. That's also pretty clear-cut about what you can and can't do. The gray area, or I should say the orange area, is really if something is ethical but illegal. And this happens a lot of times in medical situations where, like if you take euthanasia as a very extreme example, it is illegal in most places to assist somebody from dying, but a doctor might feel that is his or her ethical duty to help that person make that happen. So that usually doesn't affect conflicts of interest. But what does is if it's legal and unethical. And that's kind of this gray area whereby you need to have your suppliers and your internal staff really adhere to what your policies are. And not just, again, it's not just about slapping up a policy on the internet, but how do you really embed this culture of good ethics and responsibility and conflict of interest into your organization. And that's what's tricky to do because the internal auditors, the risk managers, the board, and the CEO care about it. The shareholders certainly care about it. But how do you get, if you're working at a bank and you have 20,000 employees, how do you get a bank teller to care about that? And that's where technology can really help. So what technology does, obviously, is create a transparent process to stop fraud in its tracks, and that's what you want to do with a conflict of interest register. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about Suncorp, who's one of our clients. They've been working with us for several years, and I'll just talk a little bit about the issues that they faced and also how they kind of manage the whole process. So Suncorp is obviously a large bank based in Queensland, but they have offices across Australia and New Zealand. They also have a very robust external broker network because they do have not only the banking, but they have all the business and the personal insurance division. So they have 17,000 employees, and using the COI register, they have directors, including everyone from the chairman down to the bank teller, the external brokers, and they use their technology as really as a way, not just a place to declare and approve the different conflicts that come in, but also as a way to train employees about what it is. So again, the theme that, why do good people do bad things? A lot of times they don't know, or they're not thinking about what conflicts of interest, especially if they're kind of a mid or lower role within the company. So what you can do is in your conflict of interest register, you can really make it robust where you have a training video, which Suncorp do here in the bottom left corner. Frequently asked questions, so how do you understand your responsibilities? They have their policies there, and anytime there's an update on any of this automatically gets emailed out to the employee base. So I guess another question that a lot of people ask, like, oh my gosh, 17,000 people, do people even remember their password? How do they get in? And what we've done with Suncorp and some of our other large clients is we make this a link off your intranet, so nobody has to register. Once you click on that link to declare a gift given or gift received, you're automatically registered. And then with Suncorp, what we do is we do a direct lookup to their PeopleSoft HR database, so we know every day who reports to who. So what's nice about this is that when somebody goes in to submit a conflict, it automatically goes to their manager. They don't have to guess where a conflict has gone or not. And then the workflow abides by what their policy is with regards to dollar amounts and who it needs to go to and how things get elevated. So that's a really nice way of just making it easy for people to do, because if it's not easy, if they're clunky forms, it's never going to happen within a company. So I'll just share with you quickly what a COI register looks like. So it depends on the organization. So some of our medical clients, much more detailed forms, but this one, as an example, you can just decide the types of conflicts that you want to capture within this, who the person is, describe what's the date that it happened, the amount, and who is involved. So again, super easy for people to do it, therefore it gets done. That's kind of the big takeaway there. With regards to the process, so once people submit a form, usually what happens, it goes through a workflow process to their manager. So the gift needs to be returned to the consulting company if it's over a certain amount, and then there's an audit trail on who said what, where, and when, and enforcing that. So we just got a great comment from Pritesh about monitoring gifts received outside of HR records. So it does come down to honesty and ethics of individuals. I totally agree. But if you have an easy-to-use system to manage it, people will abide by it usually, because most people are honest deep down. But if you don't have this process, it's much harder. And if you're relying on a spreadsheet and just a policy up on your intranet, it's very difficult. But if you can give people an easy-to-use thing, I mean, hundreds of these come through all the time with our clients, so it does get used. And what's nice about it is that the onus of the management of this goes to line managers. So within large organizations, even like some hospitals that we work with, you know, we might have 2,000 different approvers who are approving the people underneath them what's going on. And because we're interacting with HR databases, people don't have to think about, oh, who do I send this to? Who does it go to? It just happens automatically. So that's a very kind of nice way to manage that. The other thing that is important is reporting, meaning that with regards to reporting, that the managers can then pull custom reports. So you can say, I'm just interested in seeing the gifts and the amount. So what's important is that it just doesn't go into a black hole, but line managers have the ability to basically run these reports, as well as HR and internal audit, and the board can actually see the data on this as well. One other thing I wanted to touch on, and we can come back to questions on COI as well, but another, I guess, a tool or a way to kind of plug ethics gaps within the organization is with control self-assessment. So most of you probably are aware of this or use this, but it's a technique that allows managers to work and work teams to get who are involved with the business to basically participate in assessing the organization's risk management and control process. So usually CSA covers objectives, risks, controls, and processes within a survey. And a lot of companies manage this with Excel, which is kind of a nightmare, I guess, from an audit perspective and tracking. So Deloitte is one of our partners, and they have developed with us some software and also a question set to help customers deal with internal controls. So again, you know, going back to why does fraud even happen? It's all about the opportunity. So if the controls aren't there, the fraud and the conflicts are more prone to happen. So I'll just share with you some of the ways that a control self-assessment usually works. So usually what happens is that you have a set of questions. Let's say it's about payroll, or it's about handling treasury, or whatever it has to do with. And then each individual within the company, depending on their role and their level, assesses that control. Is it working? Is it not? Can they upload evidence? And then what's really nice about it is that it goes then to their boss, who can then review the answers, make comments, and then there's an audit trail on that. And what's very important about, I guess, control self-assessment is that you can, depending on, most companies that we work with do it twice a year, but what they do is you can create a hierarchy. So this is the bigger hierarchy on the right, but then a close-up. So when John or Karen does a CSA survey, it then goes to Lisa, and then it goes to the CFO or to the head of risk, who can then see all the different attestations for the different controls. And then at the end of the day, what they want to see is, of all the controls, are there any exceptions to the rule? Are there any conflicting answers? And, you know, what are the responses, basically, of that? So, again, using this piece of technology for really for managing the internal control process and the attestation of that is really important, because there is a big difference, as we all know, with what your policy is and then versus the practice as well. So I guess just to sum up, you know, thinking about ethics, and just as a summary, you know, corporate culture plays a huge part of this. So again, it's all about leadership, and it's all about, you know, somebody just wrote in a note about perceptions. So, you know, what is your company happy with? Is accepting the dollar scratch it okay, or is it not okay? So different companies have different appetites for that. and it's ensuring that leadership and the people in your organization from top down. So if your chairman or your CEO or your head of HR is going on junkets, well, I'll tell you what, everyone else in the company is going to be trying to as well, because they'll think it's their right. Systems and processes, having a system, not a spreadsheet, is hugely important. Also thinking about it from an HR perspective, like how are people promoted, how are people hired, what is that process, is it a fair and open system? Leadership I mentioned, and then, you know, having the policies there, and also a lot of clients that we're working with now, in addition to their formal policies, it's a how we work. They create how we do things. So it's not a policy per se, but it's just it's a behavior guide about how we do things, how we treat each other, how we treat our customers, how we, you know, if we have flexible work hours, how we handle that. So having that how we work policy as well is very important, and then obviously having systems and processes to bring it to life. So again, you know, having these great policies are no use if the business doesn't embrace them. And that is a challenge for internal audit and risk, because, you know, we all care about it, but how do you get people in marketing or in customer support or even casual workers to know and embrace what they're doing as well? So that's all I had, I guess, for the formal part of the presentation. I'm really happy to take any questions, or if anybody has any other questions that you can send through to me. I have gotten a couple of other questions that were sent to me privately. One of them was, how do you handle repeated offenders, and when do you get the police involved? So I guess for that question, you know, that has to do with your kind of internal policies. So usually if there's a clear process to declare anything from a small gift to a large junket, for instance, from a COI perspective, you know, that's just a potential conflict, not actual fraud, but that would have to be a part of your actual policies. Another question I've just received is more on CSA. So yeah, so we can provide, yeah, so with regards to control self-assessment, yeah, we're happy to come back and do another one on how that whole process works, because that's probably a whole other topic, but we can do that as well. So with regards to one question, how do you question conflict of interest where your direct supervisor is involved? Some of our clients have another process where they can use it almost like as a whistleblower service, so they can actually skip above their direct supervisor. So that's something with technology you can do, obviously, quite easily. So people can submit conflicts anonymously if they're uncomfortable for their direct supervisor to see that. So we have a lot of clients who do that. And another question we just got was, the methods introduced were to audit, record the honest individuals who report ethically to the company. How do you detect people who don't report? So that's where this kind of tandem, I guess, whistleblower type functionality you can do. So we use Intelligence Bank for just a pure whistleblower capability, but you can also have, you know, report something anonymously through the system, so people can self-register or include anonymous information, so it doesn't track, you know, obviously how they got in there to report that. And that's actually really important, especially if there is a strong culture. Sometimes we see, like with the middle management, there's a culture of, you know, long lunches with your consulting agencies and things like that, and where, you know, other staff members don't think it's right or just, and then they have a means to report that as well. The other question, which I think is great, should employee incentive schemes also be focused, which can lead to improper? Yeah, I mean, definitely. You know, we see all the time that, you know, company values and abiding by, you know, policies is part of, you know, your role to be paid and for bonuses as well within the company. So definitely. But I think one of the problems, what we see usually that happens is that, you know, if the company is kind of not doing it from the top, it just spreads down really quickly. But if you have your executive team, your board, who are all, you know, doing the same process that everyone else is, and it's very clear what people are doing, then yeah, definitely that helps it a lot. And, you know, you're never going to stamp it out 100%, but this does help a lot. Yes, so Raj just sent another question. It relies on the presumption that there is a good whistleblower system in place. Usually state governments rely on IIA provisions to force staff to report, but doesn't take into account the ethical dilemma faced by an employee fearing their jobs or career growth. That is true. So, you can have a system in place such as Intelligence Bank with its whistleblower or conflict of interest or a mixture of both in the same platform. However, you need the management team to buy into it and to be a part of it. And if you don't, then it's never really going to happen, I don't believe. We've seen companies who've tried to install, a system, but if they're rotten to the core and management are corrupt, then or unethical, I should say, not necessarily corrupt, but it just won't happen, and people will fear for the jobs. But if you're able to then, leapfrog over immediate supervisors who are problematic in that area, then, you do have a vehicle to do that as well. So how do you manage conflicts when you have a smaller number of staff in the finance department dealing with purchasing and payments? I think that has to do with your controls. So that's why I talked a little bit about control self-assessment. So that's where, having, multiple people sign off on payments and putting systems in place to deal with that. Kay, I can also put you in touch with our colleagues at Deloitte who have, a great internal control capability in management. So, yeah, so I can definitely put you in touch with them if you want to email me after on how they handle that. Okay, so I think these are just comments as well. Are there any other specific questions that I can help with as well? Okay, so if there's no other comments, if you'd like a copy of this presentation, I'm really happy to send it through to you. My email address is tessa.court@intelligencebank.com as well. So I'm really happy to, one more question here. So do organizations generally have staff sign COI declarations on an annual basis? That's another thing that you can do. We have a lot of boards that do that, so they use the COI survey tool to survey the board as well as senior management on annual conflicts. So that's another great way to use the COI survey is for conflicts. The percentage of items reported in the register that have been translated into actual instances. Well, usually what happens with conflicts of interest registers is that things have been offered or given, but they haven't actually occurred yet. So just in our experience with our clients, just in, this isn't, audited data or anything, but just from feedback that we've gotten, usually about 90% can be managed through the business, and about, 10 to 15% are, hugely problematic. But then you also have to keep in mind that people who do have a system in place, such as Suncorp, have, they have the policies and they've committed as an organization to embed a culture of ethics and responsibility within their organization. So it's not just the system that's doing it; it's the broader organization. Okay, so I think those are the last comments, and I just wanted to thank everyone for participating and for logging in. And if you do want a copy of the presentation, please send me an email. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for that, Tessa, and thank you for everyone for attending today. I hope you got a lot out of it. It was definitely very, very informative. Guys, as you're leaving the session, there's a feedback form that pops open. Simply just, it takes about 30 seconds to fill in, depending on the comments. Please do take the time to fill it in. Great feedback for Tessa, and also great feedback for the Institute of Internal Auditors. All the best for 2014. I believe that this is the last session for 2015. I stand corrected. Looking forward to seeing you in 2016 next year. Till then, have a safe festive period, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.